Hello, today we're going to be talking about the importance of the reader promise. We're also going to define what that is and make sure that we really discuss why this is such an important promise and why it is important that you fulfill on it in your work. I also want to say thank you to everyone who showed up to the writing award ceremony. I was so excited to see so many happy faces there. It was awesome. As far as the next contest, the scary story contest obviously is coming up. Keep in mind that we'll have different rules and regulations because I am not the one fully in charge of that. I'm just helping grade with that because the person who created the contest will be in charge of that since I have created the other contest, but she made that one. So just keep in mind it's 8 pages. It does not specify font, but no, if it's not readable, we can't really grade it. So I would recommend Times New Roman 12 or 11 would be pushing it though, so I might say not less than 11. Times New Roman 12 or 11 point font would be recommended. And then if you do single spaced, that would be the best way to make the most of your 8 pages. That being said, we also have a first chapter contest coming up in November and then a cozy mystery contest coming up in December. Moving right into the video, if you foreshadow something in the beginning or the middle of your story, you should have it appear in the story somewhere else as well. A great example of this is more the principle of Chekhov's gun. His rule was that if you show a gun in Act 1, it should be used in Act 2, and if you show a gun in Act 2, it should be used in Act 3, and so on. Whereas in typical writing, you may see something where it's like, oh yeah, we're going to show you this and it's a red herring. If it's a red herring, you need to tell your readers it's a red herring in the next act. If you wait till the very end of the book to be like, oh, it's a red herring, then it feels like they were waiting intensely for nothing. So it's important if you're going to have it be a red herring to dismiss it early, so that way people are less frustrated with the concept. The other reason why it's important to fulfill on this foreshadowing / reader promises is because of the fact that it is what makes readers want to keep reading. So for example, if you promise the reader that these two characters are going to get together at the end because it is a romance novel, and then all of a sudden you have them both tragically die, that's a tragedy, not a romance. So you have to be careful too what you label yourself genre-wise, because if that reader promise is not met, then we're going to be upset. And the reader is going to be like, well, that book sucked. And you don't want them to do that because your book could be a beautiful tragedy, but if you label it as a romance, they're going to think it sucks because they were looking for happily ever after. Very similarly, if you make the reader promise that it is a superhero novel and then there are no superheroes, again, they're going to think that it sucks, even if it is a fantastic novel, because you made a promise that you did not keep. So just keep in mind, foreshadowing and the reader promise of what genre you have are incredibly important. You need to know what the trends and regulations are for that genre and what people generally expect out of that genre. And there are so many subgenres. You should definitely, I would highly recommend all of you look into what subgenres there are, because even if you're romance, you could fit under tragic romance, absolutely. Or you could fit under fantasy romance or paranormal romance. Or if you're not doing romance, it was just the first thing to pop into my head, you could also say it's for example, like nowadays, romantasy versus fantasy are drastically different genres with drastically different expectations in those genres as well. So it's important to identify properly what genre you are, both for when you're querying and for indie authors. Both need it. Because if you query under the incorrect genre, you're not going to get many people taking your manuscript. And if you go independent and you tell people, hey, this is what it is, and that's not right, then you're going to have readers who are upset as well. Moving on to the importance of foreshadowing, though. Don't mention something trivial unless you mean it to be a red herring. If it is supposed to be a red herring, that's fine. But if you mention something trivial, you don't have to go into great detail on it. unless it is important to the story. So for example, you don't need to mention what allergies the character has unless it is going to play an important role in the plot. So for example, if they are super hyper allergic to hay and then all of a sudden they are hiding from a monster in a pile of hay and they sneeze and that's what gives them away, that's important to know, because then the reader goes, oh no, we see that coming, we get really intense, and it's part of the intensity of the scene. Or alternatively, like if there was a murder mystery and you know that this person is allergic to sesame oil and they had a salad with an oil vinaigrette dressing and you're like, ooh, was that what poisoned him? Did he just have an allergic reaction and there was sesame oil in it? That also is very intriguing. You got to make sure that you have the trivial details matter, because if they don't matter, then you might as well cut out that scene. Generally, you don't need to put in scenes of them showering unless they're super muddy or they're super gross. In that case, you can specify they went and took a shower to wash off. But generally, you don't need to mention things like showering or using the restroom or things like that unless it's really important. Times when using the restroom would be important is if like they're sick or something like that. That would be important to know. But generally, trivial details like showering, using the restroom, allergies, what you bought at Walmart last week aren't going to be as important to your story, unless you're going to Walmart to like purchase a bunch of strawberries because you know that so-and-so is allergic to strawberries and you plan to murder them. Then that's very important to your plot. But if it's just kind of random stuff that isn't really relevant, then maybe don't include it. Those kinds of things can be incredibly helpful if they are relevant. But we don't need to know all the details. We only need to know the important things too. For example, if during that same Walmart trip where they're buying the deadly strawberries, they are also buying toothbrushes and toothpaste and maybe a blanket or something like that. If those things aren't important to the plot, you don't need to mention that. You just need to mention and emphasize the strawberries. Be like, as they were checking out and putting all their things in their bag, they kept noticing the glistening red strawberries and they couldn't wait to enact their plan or something like that. That is incredibly important. And especially because that's what the person would legitimately be thinking. They wouldn't be thinking, oh yeah, the toothpaste super matters. No, they're thinking the only thing that matters is that, because that's what's on their mind. So keep in mind, even if they do get other stuff or have other things, like if the peanut allergy is the most important thing, or in this case the strawberry allergy is the most important thing, then mention that. If they have like a million other allergies, you don't need to mention them. You just need to mention the one that is most important for the plot. Next thing is, remember to show these details, don't tell us these details. So, like I said with the strawberry scene, if they're staring at the strawberries glistening and thinking how deadly they will be to the person who is super allergic, then that's showing us that these are sinister strawberries, that they have sinister intentions, instead of saying they plan to kill someone with strawberries. That's just a statement of a fact, and it doesn't read well. It reads like a textbook, which isn't very interesting for our readers. So you got to make sure you show these foreshadowing moments, and you don't tell. Another example of telling would be saying, there is a gun on the wall, and then continuing with the plot. It's like, whoa, wait, why did we need to know that? There's no reason to know that. Whereas it's so much more subtle and so much more artful if you say, the gun hung on the mantelpiece, and he wondered if the man was perhaps a hunter before turning back to the conversation, or something like that. That makes it so much more subtle, so that way when the person does get chased with the gun or whatever, it makes it so that you don't see it coming directly. Instead, you are like, oh, that's right, and it makes it so much more enlightening for the reader and so much more interesting to have it just be kind of like, oh my gosh, wait, that's the thing. And you want that reaction from your readers. You want them to be able to see it for themselves. Telling is basically spoon feeding them all of these details and all of these promises. That is okay when you are writing children's books, because like children, they sometimes need to have it spoon-fed to them, or like the little airplane, choo-choo. If they are too old to have physical food spoon-fed to them, they are too old to have these details in a story spoon-fed to them. As a result, show, don't tell. Or if you do tell, do it tactfully. However, keep in mind, tactfully telling is incredibly hard to master and takes a lot of practice. So it doesn't mean you can't do it, but just means keep that in mind and be aware that it might take a lot more practice. A great example of tactful telling would be something like, she noticed the gun up on the mantelpiece. She really hated guns. She wished that he didn't own one. It made her uncomfortable. You're stating a lot of facts, but you're also showing us that there's the gun through this statement of her feelings about it. So it's more tactfully telling us that there's a gun on the wall. That's a great example of that. It's really hard to master, though. It sounds easy when I give an example like that, but it's not as easy as it sounds, mainly because of the fact that if you are tactfully telling, the ease with which you might slip into regular telling is just super quick. So it might take a lot more editing and a lot more finesse to work through. Last thing that I want to talk about, if you tell us at the end someone will die in order to fulfill the prophecy, or if you tell us, like I said, that it will be happily ever after because of romance, because it's the romance genre or something like that, the reader expects someone to die if they are supposed to fulfill that prophecy. Or if you say the goal is for this character to get to the prom, she is saving up all this money for her prom dress and she's going to the prom whether she's single or not, and then we don't have that prom scene, then we feel really sad. And unfortunately, we feel like, oh, shoot, I was really expecting to see that prom scene. You know, she's been saving up for it this whole novel, and then all of a sudden we don't have it. That feels like a real letdown for our readers, unfortunately. So if you have a goal that the characters are working towards the whole novel, make sure they achieve that goal, even if it's not quite what they think. So for example, with the prom thing, if they if they're like, hey, I'm going to go to the prom whether I'm single or not, and then at the last minute when they buy their dress, it turns out they don't have her right size, and so she ends up having to buy a different dress that she didn't exactly want. She goes home and she tries to tailor it to look more like the dress she wanted or something like that. That's fine. And then she goes to the prom. It's fine to have some twists and turns getting there, but we still need that scene at the end. If we're promised a scene, then we still need that scene. Or like with the dying in order to fulfill a prophecy example, it can be a twist, like in Harry Potter, spoiler alert, you can skip this if you want. Harry Potter does die, but then he comes back to life because of holding the resurrection stone, and he's able to come back. And so as a result of that, he did die, but then he came back. It's still fulfilling that reader expectation, even if you have a twist to it. But make sure the twist makes sense and make sure it is well foreshadowed. If it just comes out of nowhere, then it feels like you're just trying to pedal back on that promise, and it makes people really frustrated to have you promise something and then not give it to you. Readers expect to trust the author. Even if you have an unreliable narrator, they expect to be able to trust the author on the journey. And so this is an important part of building a good relationship with your reader, is fulfilling on those promises. By having, if you foreshadow a scene will be done by the end of the thing, you do that scene by the end of the thing. Thank you so much for listening to my video. I hope you have a lovely week and enter in the future contests. I would love to see more entries and continue to have this grow bigger and bigger. Thank you so much.